Hello, and welcome to the House of Family Therapy, faculty, friends, and a little bit of fun, a podcast on the world of systemic and family therapy featuring the therapist. In an era of prolific podcasting, there's so many amazing therapists offering important and valuable thoughts and insights into the world of mental health, including many amazing systemic and family therapists. Yet, as two licensed therapists and educators of therapists in training, what often fascinates us the most are not those thoughts and insights, but the people themselves, those who have chosen to become systemic and family therapists, whose personal stories have driven them to sit with, hold space for, and be in relationship with others who are struggling and going through hardships. This podcast aims to explore and interview a variety of family therapists in different spaces and places in their personal journeys and careers to highlight their humanity, their passions, and the motivations to be helpers and healers. And in true experiential and systemic foundational principles, to do this with a little bit of joy, humor, and laughter. Thank you for joining us today. With us is Dr. Tom Carlson. Dr. Carlson, we're just going to throw some questions at you at the top before we formally introduce you to everyone.
Sure.
A little game of what we call this or that. So glass half full or glass half empty?
Half full, definitely.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert, but a shy one.
See the future or change the past?
See the future.
Pizza or tacos?
Ooh. I'm in San Diego, so tacos.
Reading one book at a time or multiple books at once?
Multiple books at once.
Sunrise or sunset?
That's a tough one. But probably for the wonder of it, the sunset.
Sneeze confetti or hiccup bubbles?
Wow, probably sneeze confetti.
Sci-fi or fantasy?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I could go either way. It depends on the quality of the sci-fi, I think.
We're gonna this or that it. You gotta pick one.
It's a tough one. Well, okay, I'll go sci-fi if it's like Star Wars.
Puzzle night or trivia night?
Ooh, can I be neither? I
No.
can't, can I?
No.
This or that.
I know it's this or that. I probably wouldn't do either of them, but trivia. Yeah.
Beach day or pool day?
Beach.
And then this last one is not a this or a that, but we ask in every podcast. So, what animal are you and why?
What animal? Yeah, that's a tough one. Probably a dolphin. And why? They're playful and they seem to get along with other groups of sea animals.
That one was actually mine as well.
Okay.
And I added
dolphins, yeah.
Yes. They are very friendly.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, we have Dr. Carlson with us today, and he is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a professor and branch director for Alliant CFD program at the San Diego campus. Dr. Carlson is the co-editor of the Journal of Contemporary Narrative Therapy. He has published and presented extensively on the areas of narrative therapy, pedagogy, LGBTQ affirmative therapy, relational accountability for couples, and pro-feminist therapy with men. He's collaborated closely with narrative therapist co-founder David Epstein on the development of several new and emerging ideas in contemporary narrative therapy, including insider witnessing practices and the development of new pedagogy for teaching and learning narrative therapy throughout practice stories. Dr. Carlson, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Sure.
As we get started, as we always do in marriage and family therapy, would like just offer you a space to orient yourself to your social positioning, social location that is meaningful and important for folks listening to know about you that you want to share.
Yeah, in terms of what's important to me, I don't know if many categories of my social location are important to me, but my relationships matter a great deal. To me, who I am is significantly defined by my relationships. So with my partner of 8 years, and I have 3 children uh, who are all grown now. So I get the benefits of that. I was telling a story one time to my students, trying to kind of introduce myself by way of what matters. And there's a story of it's my partner and her child, actually. And her daughter, when she was younger, was looking at her bookshelf and saying, "Why are all the books on the same topic?" And the title of the books, many of the books were titled Love. And the response was, "Because love is all that matters." I guess that I feel that way as well. So I'm defining myself not by social location, but maybe by ethics, values that I hold. Yeah.
That's a nice segue, I think, because the next question is how did you find your way to family therapy or relational family therapy?
Yeah. Well, I do these interviews with my students every year in the narrative therapy elective. It's about like finding their why, their mission as a therapist. And the question is, why did you decide to be, a family therapist? And often there's pretty dramatic stories when people are asked to look back, you know, in the moments of their lives. Mine's not super dramatic. I think there are probably historical reasons. Uh, in terms of believing, as a kid, always really believing in hopefulness and healing and transformation. One of my earliest beliefs, memories, is when I was like 5. When people would ask me what I wanted to be, my answer was a fire truck. Meaning, no, not a firefighter, the whole truck. I'm just joking anyway, but a belief that maybe unusual things are possible. That's always been part of my life. But really, I was going to go into international relations. That was my chosen major in undergrad. And the day before school started, I was in my advisor's office, sitting in the waiting room, and I was sitting with somebody out there, and I was like, "Hey, what are you doing? What are you studying?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm studying marriage and family therapy." And I said, "What's that?" And he went on to explain what it was. And I said, just immediately said, "That's what I want to do." I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. I changed my major to family studies, but knew that's what I was going to do. And I just kept going straight through, all the way through. But it was just kind of like an immediate knowing that that's what I wanted to do.
Did anything change for you to decide to transition into academia?
I kind of knew pretty early in undergrad that I wanted to be a professor. So I just kind of also went straight through because I knew I wanted to teach. I always enjoyed teaching. And I really wanted the flexibility of being able to not just do one thing, not just being a therapist, but also working with students, teaching, researching, and maybe a hope of making a contribution in some way. That kind of mattered to me.
What was your journey in discovering your specialty or specialties or niche?
Well, I guess my specialty niche is narrative therapy. As Tabitha read about. I mean, I found my way to narrative therapy when I was in my master's program. This was more than a couple of years ago. And so narrative therapy was still new enough that it wasn't really taught in master's programs. So it was new. It was like early 90s. I remember learning, some of the typical family therapy theories and everything and starting to try them out. And I remember kind of a distinct memory. I always have been, maybe based on my answers to your questions, someone who kind of believed in the glass half full, that real change, transformation are possible in people's lives. Maybe the impossible might be possible. Dreams might be within reach, that kind of. And I remember being told at one point that was too ambitious, and that trying for that kind of change was maybe outside the scope of some of the models of therapy. And then maybe that the best we could hope for is change that would maybe be seen more like coping, managing, that kind of thing. And And I got really discouraged at that point and wondered a little bit whether this is for me in some way, and then I came across an article on my own written by Bill O'Hanlon, who's actually a solution oriented therapist, as he would call himself. And he had just spent 2 weeks with David Epstein and Michael White and told of his story of what it was like. And one of the things in the article that he said is that David and Michael could conjure up doors out of nowhere and that people could step through and find themselves in an entirely new life and an entirely new world. He compared himself more to Elmer Fudd, not Bugs Bunny, who would paint and would slam into the rock rather than be able to go through it. But I think right in that moment, I felt like, okay, here's something that really resonates with me. If that's possible, then this is what I want to do. And I kind of never looked back. One, it's a good fit for me in terms of my beliefs, my values, my ethics, how I see the world. But I think the real reason I've stayed with it is because I've seen people walk through those doors and find themselves in a life that they didn't think was possible. And so that's really why I keep doing it, because I've seen it happen. So
Sure, sure. And metaphorically, it sounds like you did that for this field as well. Is opening that door. What's new and exciting in your world regarding this topic or any other topic? What's at the forefront of your mind?
well, I've just finished. I'm kind of in the middle of a couple projects that are really interesting to me, and maybe they're related to what's forefront of my mind. But just finished recently, published a book with a colleague of mine, Sunny Paliaka, what we call trying to explain narrative therapy anew, as like David Epstein calls it, a contemporary narrative therapy. And part of that is that, David was concerned, so was Michael right before his death, Michael White and David Epstein. People practicing narrative therapy had lost the kind of spirit of imagination, uh, adventure, maybe even some of the connection to the politics of it, and turned it into kind of just some steps. And David, after years after Michael's death, kind of decided, all right, uh, we need to do something about that. We need to return narrative therapy back outside of the steps and return it to its origins and recenter the importance of story and narrative, that it's not just about externalizing problems. In fact, that's just a very small part of what narrative therapy should be. And so the book was really about coming up with an entirely new set of terminology, fresh terms. David likes to say that words have a shelf life, just like food has a shelf life. And when words originally are used, they have metaphorical meaning to us. They inspire us, but over time, they lose their metaphorical status and they become rigid, and we treat them as fact. And then when we do that, we obey them rather than they don't inspire us. We become obedient to them. And so David was saying we need new terms to re-inspire, to refresh narrative therapy. And the book really was about that. Years of working with David and coming up with both maybe a new terms, but also a new way of thinking about what narrative therapy is about. So that's been a major thing on my mind. Maybe the other thing that's always been at the center of my thinking is the importance of thinking about life and relationships in the, well, moral and ethical realm to help maybe move a little bit outside of maybe psychological ways of thinking about human lives. Like I do things because I have a particular disorder or whatever it might be, like do this versus how do we invite people to step into their moral and ethical commitments as it relates to how they treat each other? One of the things I've been working on for many, many years is an approach to couples therapy called relational accountability. It's a narrative way of thinking about couples therapy, but it doesn't look like narrative therapy in its steps, but it feels like it. One of the things that Michael White said is that, that if in our interactions with one another, we are always participating in shaping each other's stories of self, right? Stories are always being negotiated in our relationships with other people. Then we are more responsible than ever for the shaping effects of our interactions on people's stories of self. He was referring to therapists and clients, but when I read that for the maybe 50th time, it dawned on me like the weight of this in terms of what does this mean for my life, my relationships with my partner, my children, right? People close to me. And I decided, what if couples therapy could be about people really taking seriously their ethical responsibilities for how they shape each other's stories in their relationships day by day, right? And that's what the model of couples therapy is about. And that's always on my mind to live more and more by ethical intention.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I think one of the really amazing things of our Alliant faculty is we've got a handful of what I call living legends that are still right part of our faculty and doing this work. And as you're kind of describing this, I personally put you in the category of living legend. That right when you're
Wow.
saying, yeah, I do take it or not, but
Okay.
right, like you are a voice of a generation of narrative therapy and has influenced and informed where that modality has gone. And we don't do a ton of interacting, but I get to see the students that interact with you and how that shapes them. And so as you were just saying, like, this is the thing I think about all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That really, I guess, resonated with my image of you and how you've been able to shape this really amazing sort of piece of our MFT history.
Oh, thank you,
Um,
Tabitha.
so in thinking about, the reason we put this podcast together is hopefully our students are listening and learning
Mm.
about us, but really, future students too. And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if you have any like takeaway messages for students, future students that you want them to hear.
One of the things I'm always talking about in my classes, one of the things that's really important to me with my students is I want students to have a really strong sense of of their their purpose, their mission in their work, and in a way, I want it to be a decolonized mission. And what I mean by that, by decolonized, is in particular the ways that professional and psychological ways of thinking have told us what's okay to hope for and what's okay not to hope for. And oftentimes people come in with a narrow story of, well, I just wanted to help people. That's not a very rich. I want to talk to them. I guess my belief is that everyone should be able to have a a really rich story of their why for being a therapist that is rooted and situated in their lives and relationships, the history of their life, and that there were critical moments throughout the histories of their lives where they decided to be a particular person or to enact a particular value or ethic in the world. And those series of decision points that they made along the way would be, in my mind, like a really substantial and rich story of their talents, their virtues, their ethics, and that they can have the power, the weight of that living story, that living history with them as they are in the room with people, that they're not just following professional ethics, but they're following very deeply held personal and relational ethics that are tied to their lives, their histories, their families, significant people in their lives, perhaps their lands, their waters, their rocks, metaphorically, our ancestors, our homes, and that be the center of the passion of the work that we do. I'm always telling students that don't settle for a shallow reason for why you wanted to be a therapist. You have a life and a history that matters a great deal, where your values and ethics really came through. And I wrote a paper, one of my first publications. I was a master's student when I wrote this, and it was for a class assignment. So students, you can also write papers and publish them, right? Yeah, we all talk about self of the therapist or person of the therapist, right? And at the time, I think it's still this way in some ways that most of the work around self of the therapist, person of the therapist work. This is, I don't mean that this is always the case, but most of it is around looking at how our lives and our histories might be barriers to our work as therapists, as if our lives and histories are, in a way, kind of to be avoided, to be looked at with caution, with suspicion, like I have to hold back this part of me because, and it's very difficult to hold back something versus living something on purpose. And so one of the things, this paper I called it was, rather than person of the therapist, we called it person in the therapist. And it was based on this idea that no, your life, your struggles, the things you've been through might not be barriers. They might uniquely qualify you to do this work. And maybe in narrative therapy fashion, we're looking to reauthor the stories of therapists' lives to look at not just how their lives might keep them from being a good therapist, but how it might uniquely qualify them to relate to people who are suffering. I would want people to know that there's a person in there who has unique history and values and struggles and suffering and hopes that can be embraced and not just uh, resisted.
I'm going to be pondering on that for a while. It's a really beautiful like reframe of that work that we do and bring in those, unique strengths out. That's really lovely. As you sort of alluded to, not calling you old in any way, but you've been doing this work for a while, right?
Yeah,
Seasoned is the term I like to use.
Seasoned, yeah.
seasoned. Yeah, yeah.
And most of us, right, that have at least been doing the work for a while, right? The students are at the center of that joy and showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as right, we get to teach our students, teach us a lot in that
Mm-hmm.
process.
Mm.
I'm wondering if there's something a student, told you or taught you along the way that you just will never forget.
Yeah, there's so many things. I think it it's hard to come up with one. I could tell a couple stories maybe, but um, one of the things I'm really privileged and honored to do is, well, because I do these what I call mission interviews with my students in the class I teach in the narrative therapy elective. What I do each week is interview a student about their why, that we can find their mission, a mission that if when I say it back to them, that would make them proud. Like if this were your mission, and I interview them while the other students are watching, but they're also taking notes because I'm asking them to write back to the person the next week and, in a form of a therapeutic poem and read it back to them. Anyway, which is really meaningful. But a person's mission is always really deeply connected to things that they have faced, been up against in life. There's so many stories of students who, in the face of despair, in the face of neglect, chose love. And I guess the joy of the work that I do is most people, when they look back at when they are living their lives, they don't know that they did it because of love. They're just living their life. And that moment when I ask a student like why it's so important for them to be the kind of therapist that creates a space where people feel known, understood. It's almost always because they know what it's like not to, right? And to hear those stories and, I'll never forget so many of the stories, and I don't know if I can share them here. But what I always learn in those interviews is I come away feeling inspired by my students that if I could live my life in some small measure like they have lived their life, then I would be proud if I could do that.
Kind of last, like, serious question here for you. When you think about family therapy, kind of, overarching, what do you think's the, like, secret sauce or the magic behind family therapy?
Whatever we call family therapy, whether we call it systemic or relational. I could talk about the difference between those things for me, but the secret sauce, the magic of family therapy, which I feel like has been forgotten a bit over the years, has been a refusal to look at people's problems, suffering, whatever it might be, in the usual way, and to refuse to narrow people's struggles down to individual characteristics, to personality traits, to individual diagnoses, and to look at the web and the richness of human lives and relationships, and that the way forward is always based on how people now, right, in therapy, choose to relate to each other differently. And that the hope isn't about finding out what's wrong, but it's finding a different way of living together as a family, as a couple, as a person in the world. And I think that is the magic of family therapy. And I think since I was a student, you know, in the 1990s, early 90s till now, I think one of my things I lament a little bit is that family therapists have let go of their insistence on working with families and relationships and couples, and have sided with the idea that, well, I'll just work with client says they want to work as an individual, so I'll just do that without an insistence on, no, I'm a family therapist. I'm a relational therapist, and here's why I work in this way. And maybe even understanding the real value of what it means to be a family therapist has gone missing a lot. And so I would like a return to that, a return to that
Yeah.
magic, and not just going along with the systems because of the agencies or insurance companies or whatever it might be, or the current ideology of our time that tells people that they struggle because there's something wrong inside of them. So I guess I would like a return to the magic. And future family therapists, speaking to you students who are watching, our future students, to be a family therapist means to be a family therapist or a relational therapist, and to not just give in to working with individuals because either the client says so, or an agency might say so, or whatever that might be. Sven Brinkman wrote a book called Diagnostic Cultures, and what he talks about different languages of suffering that have prominence over time, meaning how we make sense of suffering, right? And there's different different kinds of languages that we used to use. It used to be like religious language to make sense of suffering, or existential philosophical language to make sense of suffering. And now, he's kind of saying it really is diagnostic medical language is how we make sense of suffering. Meaning, if a human being is suffering for some reason, I must therefore have a disorder. That's what the medical model tells us. I'm not arguing against the idea that there might be something like this, but I don't know how helpful it is as a catch-all for all human beings, because as human beings, we're more than our bodies, more than our neurons. We're not just a neurochemical self. That's what he says, that's the current notion of the self, is a neurochemical self, right? And I always tell my students, no, we're human beings, and we sing, and we love, and we write poetry, and we dance, and we dream. After all, whatever we might call it, there's something more than a body and a mind, whatever you might want to call that. And maybe it's a hope to return that human suffering is because as human beings, there's something amiss in our lives, that we might have a moral question about how I ought to live my life right now in this moment. And I'm suffering because I can't find my way, not because I have a disorder or something like that. That's on my mind a lot.
So we're now going to bridge into our last set of rapid family therapy related questions.
Oh, okay.
Yes, keeping you on your toes.
Mhm.
So the first question is who is your favorite historical family therapist?
Well, Michael White. Can I say Michael White and David
Yeah.
Ibsen?
Yeah, sure.
If you were an intervention, what intervention would you be?
Well, that's tricky. That's tricky because I don't like interventions.
Okay.
I like
Are you
I
an
like
anti-interventionist, Tom? Or
well,
Dr. Thompson?
yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't like following the rules of interventions. What I had a professor, this is my master's program. I tell my students this story all the time. I was a brand new therapist, first practicum site in a residential treatment center for adolescent young women and their families. And all many of the families, I mean, I'd been working for like 2 weeks, right? But many of the families were struggling with substance abuse. And so I was in supervision and I just said, hey, do you have any readings on like family therapy and substance abuse? And I'm behind him is a bookshelf. And so I can see that he does. And his answer to me, this is Joe Wechsler, who was my professor, but he said, uh, um, no. And and he's like, Tom, what theory are you using? And he said, at the time, it's structural family therapy. It's all I knew. I like some ideas of structural family therapy still. But he said, Tom, the theory will tell you what to do. We had chances to talk over time more and more about what he really meant by that. But in the moment, at first, I was kind of pissed, you know, uh, because I knew he had the book, but it's the best thing he could have ever told me. And what he was always insistent on is a theory is not a set of interventions. Theory is much bigger than that. The theorist, Mnuchin, whoever, developed interventions based on his understanding of the theory, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. And what he said is if you just learn interventions and follow interventions, you'll never be free to innovate or to offer a family what they actually need in a moment. And so I took that to heart, and I've spent my life, my career, trying to really understand what a theory is about, because a theory, if you understand it, the theory will tell you what to do in a particular moment if you know it well enough. So I guess I like to innovate based on knowing the theory so well that in a moment I can do what's needed for a family, and that's why I don't think I'm using an intervention per se that's prescribed. So um, maybe I'll say that I'm a theory, not an intervention.
It's funny. Actually, which actually bridges us into the next
Okay.
question, which is, which theory would you least likely date?
Wow, which theory would I least likely date? Well, there's good in all theories. And I think one of the problems with theories, I do think, is that some theories were developed for a very particular purpose to work with a very particular problem, very particular group of struggles or whatever. And then that theory was expanded to work with everything. And I think that can become a problem. So the theories maybe that I'd say that are expanded to work with everything that I don't think probably should. Probably CBT. I wouldn't date CBT. I think life is a little more complex than that.
You unintentionally answered this question along the way, but I'm going to ask it again as
Okay.
something different comes up. But
Okay.
what is your favorite like therapy or therapist quote? Something that is just stuck with you that you always kind of call back to.
Yeah, it's probably, that quote from Michael White that I was kind of summarizing, just because it changed my life.
Do you
I mean,
want to
there's
say it
been
again just to have it here? Or
probably know it well enough to mostly paraphrase it, right? So, yeah, there's another one. I wish I had my book with me, but so this is in a book called Reauthoring Lives, Interviews and Essays, 1995. It's my favorite book in narrative therapy. It's basically people interviewing Michael White. Over the years, it was turned into a book, but Michael White said something somewhere, and I'm thinking about where is it? It's always in that book. So, and this one is if the stories of our lives are always being negotiated in our relationships with other people, and if in our conversations with people we are participating in the further negotiation and renegotiation of the stories of persons' lives, then we are more responsible than ever for the shaping effects of our actions on persons' stories of self. So that's pretty close, I think.
that's pretty good. That sounded really good at least.
Yeah.
Uh,
Can I add one more just because this is a short one, but it's in this book too. And this is maybe why wanting to reimagine narrative therapy now. People might say, what's the purpose of narrative therapy? Most people say, oh, externalizing conversations. I joke with my students that the answer to that is always false, that it's not externalizing conversations. But Michael White said that the purpose of this work, this is a very obscure, in an obscure article, so most people haven't read it, but the purpose of this work is to encourage people to take up an observer position in relation to the events of their lives. This is what my work has been about over the last many years. This isn't just narrative therapy is not just about talking to people, like having them tell stories about their life, and that change doesn't happen while they're telling me about their life inside their stories. Change happens when they are able to step outside of their stories and see their lives as if they were observing as a spectator, an audience member to their life. And so for me, narrative therapy, I have to find ways to listen to people's stories close enough, the times when they acted as a protagonist in their life against the odds or whatever that might be, and find a way to tell it back to them in some way as if they were an audience member listening to the story of their life being told by someone else. And when people do this, they come away with an entirely different view of who they are. And this is what, the insider witnessing practices, which you mentioned, Tabitha, has been all about, is to have a person experience at some point in therapy a dramatic retelling of the story of their life, while they sit as a spectator, an audience member to the story of their life retold.
The last and final question is if you had a therapy superpower, what would it be and why? It can't be real, and how would it work?
It can't be real.
Mm-mm.
So invisibility or telepathy, right? Something that is a superpower, superhuman superpower.
In my life and my work, I guess, has always been that no matter how difficult, how dark, that there's always light. There's a quote from Martha Nussbaum, who writes about narrative and justice. She's not a narrative therapist, but she talks about this term fancy. And what she means is not like how you dress, but it's an old fashioned word that when you see it, when something is fanciful, she says, she's kind of saying we need to return to fancy. And it's a perspective, a way we see the world. And she said that when the ways of the world are stony, fancy sees a garden growing there. So could I possess the power of fancy? uh, Meaning that, again, to see what's beautiful when others see despair. I don't know if that's probably too sincere for what you're going for.
No, I love
No,
that.
not at all. What I hear it as is maybe in a sense of sprinkling hope um, amidst despair.
Yeah, maybe a lantern. Maybe maybe it's a lot more than sprinkles.
I don't know if other people out there are Harry Potter fans, but there's a deluminator, right?
Yeah.
Dumbledore's deluminator. It's
Mm-hmm.
as you were describing
Yeah.
that's the vision that came to my head.
Or Frodo was given from Galadriel this light that shines in
Yes.
the darkness. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Carlson, for your time and story and sharing a bit about you with our audience. We're so grateful to have you here and to get to share in that space. And for everyone at home, toodaloo until next time.